What did you make of the results last night?
Well, the results were okay. You had Atlas, their cloud database, decelerated by 1 point. But still, growing at 29%. The apart from the departure of the CRO, the other big negative was in the minds of investors was the guide, the initial guide for fiscal 27. The revenue guide skewed down from consensus. The low end, I think, fell something like 40 million below consensus. So that was taken as a negative. And then, the departure of the CRO with no replacement, that was also a concern, for investors too. So that, hence the big down move in the stock today. We see some pretty big outside moves in this space, especially lately.
Do you think that this is a MongoDB story today, the stock drop, or a SaaS apocalypse story today?
Well, MongoDB is trading down a lot more than everyone else, but yeah, we're seeing, I think software is, software's certainly multiples have gotten compressed significantly in the last couple of months, but today's price action looks to be more kind of geopolitically driven across the board than some kind of like major resurgence of AI fears.
Right.
The AI fears are out there and they're going to stay out there for a while.
Well, and more what I meant was, let's say maybe 2 months ago when the SaaS apocalypse was not so much in the conversation. Let's say you have the CRO leaving. I mean, do you think the stock drops 27%, or do you think that is very
Yeah.
much amplified today by the SaaS
Yeah.
apocalypse fears?
Yeah. Well, I think it's both. I think that's fair. But I think you've got a big part of the price action here is it's unsystematic risk. It's negative alpha associated with the events going on at Mongo, the guide and the CRO leaving. So I
Right.
think it's both, but mostly it's company specific stuff going on here.
And do we have any rationale or reason as to why the CRO might be leaving? I mean, I was looking at the results, and I mean, the company did seem to be accelerating a bit this year. Then the guide is kind of what's dipping it lower.
Yeah.
It's a bit of a boomerang. What do we know about why they might be leaving?
Yeah. Yeah. We don't have the inside scoop, I'm not sure, and I'm not sure the info is out there in the public markets. If I had to guess, I'd say, the new CEO, CJ Desai, he's an operator, and he gets out in the field, he talks to customers, and he sets the tone on, what happens in the sales organization, no matter who the head of sales is. And so, my sense is there's probably some degree of, if not outright friction, just, lack of alignment between those sales leaders. The head of field ops also left. So lack of alignment between the CEO and the sales leaders and whether they got pushed out or whether they decided to leave, it's unclear. But I'd probably most likely chalk it up to kind of alignment,
Right.
with the
Right.
CEO. Yeah.
Now, you talked about CJ being out in the field, and we had him on our show a couple months ago, and he said he was spending a lot of time talking to customers.
Yeah.
And one of the points that he made on the call last night was in those conversations with customers, something that has come up is that these agentic workloads, or basically
Yeah.
the agentic products that everyone is waiting for enterprises to adopt.
Yeah.
He said it's really not happening in the ways that investors
Right.
might hope. And
Yeah.
I was struck by the comments because it was some
Yeah.
of the most candid comments that we've heard from CEOs
Yeah.
talking about this.
Right.
And I wonder what you made of that. I mean,
Yeah.
look, I'm not going to say that the stock drop was because of those comments, but
Mhm.
MongoDB, this is an infrastructure company that I would have thought would have at least had a little bit of a tailwind from people adopting AI.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, Akash, I think, you hit the nail on the head there. You're spot on. And I was struck by the same comment as well. And I think the surprising thing to me about the comment isn't the content of the comment. It's the forthrightness of that commentary, which echoes a lot of our checks in the field. Certainly indicate that, over the course of the last 12 months, adoption of agentic has been slower than what people initially thought maybe a year ago. That's fairly clear. And there's a whole host of factors, but I think Mongo, the CEO, coming out with that was maybe surprising. But keep in mind, like there's not a whole lot of traction yet from what we can see with their AI products in the enterprise. They're just starting to get some traction marketing it to the AI native privates. Which mea culpa, they made a mea culpa, said they should have done that, a year ago or 2 years ago, right? So they want to, probably some motivation to explain why there's not more traction with enterprises. But I think his comments about the backdrop are largely true.
Great. And last question for you, Steve. I always try to get a little bit clearer on what the actual products are that these companies are. Can you try to explain to us, as if you were talking to the smartest person you know outside of tech, what is the actual database software that MongoDB actually sells?
Yeah, Mongo sells a really differentiated database product. So, this is data management, and it helps companies persist data. And Mongo's database, their key product Atlas runs in the cloud, and it's designed to power operational workloads. So what that means is when companies have transactional applications, whether it's e-commerce or supply chain applications where people are reading and writing data to manage business operations, as opposed to like analytic or data warehouse applications. That's what Mongo is really used for. And then, over the last couple of years, they've supplemented that product with acquisitions and internal development to help it be useful in really agentic use cases where you're going to also put AI against those operational data stores. So that's really what they're all about.
So, and do you think that Mongo is going to be a winner in the AI era here, or are you thinking that today's stock drop is actually reflective of what's to come?
Yeah. Well, I think the AI strategy, it's still nascent. There's more products they need to develop. They want to become part of the reference architecture for people, for enterprises that are implementing agentic AI, and for the AI natives that are developing, frameworks and LLMs, right? And it's still really early days for Mongo to be relevant there. And I'm going to plead agnostic on that. I think the verdict is still out there. And, I think investors are going to need a lot more proof that there's actual traction here in terms of monetization, either with the AI natives and or with enterprises.
Great. Well, Steve, I want to thank you for coming on. That is Steve Koenig from Macquarie here on TI TV.